My older brother demanded I sell my business to bail him out of debt for the third time. When I finally said no, he hacked my accounts and embezzled everything before disappearing. The bank balance showed $347.82. Yesterday, it had shown $847,000. My business account, the one that held 5 years of profit from Castellano Digital Marketing, the company I'd built from scratch in my one-bedroom apartment, was empty. Not depleted, not reduced. Empty. The transaction history showed a single wire transfer executed at 3:17 a.m., routing number I didn't recognize, destination listed as operational expenses. $846,652.18 vanished. I'd been staring at the screen for 10 minutes when my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered because shock makes you do stupid things. The voice on the other end was my brother's, and he was laughing. Guess you should have helped me out when I asked nicely, Theo. Consider this tuition for a valuable lesson about family loyalty. The line went dead. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the phone. It clattered on my desk next to the coffee I'd poured an hour ago, back when my life was intact. Back when I still had a business. Back when I still had a brother who hadn't just destroyed everything I'd built. The cursor blinked on my screen, mocking me with its steady rhythm. $347.82, the money I'd had in checking to buy groceries this week. That's what 5 years of 18-hour days, sacrificed relationships, and deferred dreams had been reduced to. Enough for maybe 3 days of food if I was careful. Not enough to make payroll on Friday. Not enough to pay my office lease. Not enough to keep the servers running. Not enough for anything. My brother Derek had taken everything, and he'd done it because I'd finally, after 3 times bailing him out, told him no. The first time Derek had asked for money, I'd been 23 and he'd been 27. I'd just landed my first real client, a local restaurant that needed a website and social media presence. $5,000 for 3 months of work. It wasn't much, but it was mine, earned through cold calls and portfolio pieces I'd built for free just to have something to show. Derek had called me on a Thursday evening, his voice tight with panic. Theo, man, I need help. I fucked up. Bad. He'd been gambling again. Online poker, convinced he'd found a system that would make him rich. Instead, he'd lost $15,000 he didn't have, and the people he'd borrowed from were not the kind who accepted payment plans. They were threatening to break his legs. Literally. He'd shown me the text messages, graphic descriptions of what they'd do if he didn't pay within a week. I'd emptied my bank account, all of it. The $5,000 I'd just earned plus another $2,000 I'd been saving for a better computer. $7,000 handed over to my brother, who'd promised this was it. This was the wake-up call he needed. He'd never gamble again. He'd sworn it while crying, actually crying, in my apartment. Mom had called me the next day to thank me for saving Derek. She'd said I was a good brother, said family was everything, said Derek just needed to find his path, and with support from people like me, he'd figure it out eventually. I'd eaten ramen for 3 months to rebuild my savings. Derek had been back at the poker tables within 6 weeks. The second time had been 2 years later. I'd built Castellano Digital Marketing into something real by then. 20 clients, 2 employees, actual profit. Derek had shown up at my new office, the little suite I'd been so proud of, looking haggard. Theo, I'm in deep. Deeper than before. This time it was investment debt. He'd fallen for some cryptocurrency scheme, convinced by a friend that they'd discovered the next Bitcoin. He'd taken out loans, maxed out credit cards, borrowed from everyone he knew. $75,000 gone. And now the creditors were circling. He was facing lawsuits, bankruptcy, possibly criminal charges for fraud because apparently he'd lied on some of the loan applications. Mom had been there too this time, standing behind Derek in my office, her face pleading. She didn't say anything at first, just looked at me with those eyes that had gotten me to do things I didn't want to do my entire childhood. Finally, he's your brother. We can't let him go to prison. I'd been doing well. The business was growing. I'd been planning to hire a 3rd employee, maybe move to a bigger office. Instead, I'd taken out a business loan, $75,000 at 6% interest, and given it to Derek. Watched him pay off his debts, watched him promise that this was it. He'd learned his lesson. He was going to get serious about his life. Mom had hugged me. Derek had said he'd pay me back within 2 years, maximum. He'd sworn on our father's grave. Dad had been dead for 5 years by then, and invoking him felt like a manipulation, but I'd let it slide because Derek was my brother, and you're supposed to help family. The business loan had taken me 3 years to pay off. Derek had never given me a single dollar in repayment. When I'd brought it up once, he'd gotten angry. Said I was throwing my money in his face. Said real brothers didn't keep score. The third time had been 3 weeks ago. I'd been at home on a Saturday morning when Derek had barged in using the spare key I'd given him for emergencies. He'd looked terrible, unshaven, manic. He'd paced my living room while explaining that he'd gotten involved with some people, investors who'd promised huge returns. He'd put in everything he had, plus money he'd borrowed. $200,000. The investment had been fake. The investors had disappeared. Derek was ruined, facing charges, about to lose everything. "I need you to sell the business," he'd said. "Just sell it. You can start over. You're talented. But I'm dead if I don't pay these people back. They're not metaphorical people this time. They're actual criminals who will actually kill me." I'd stared at him, at this man who I'd bailed out twice before, who'd never paid me back, who'd learned nothing. Sell my business? Derek, that's insane. You can't just sell a business in a week. And even if I could, this is my life. This is everything I've built. Then I guess you're choosing your business over your brother's life. The words had been calculated, designed to hurt. Mom called an hour after Derek left. She'd used the same arguments. Family first. Derek made mistakes, but he was still my brother. I was successful. I could rebuild. Derek might not survive if I didn't help. This time, though, something in me had broken. Maybe it was the entitlement in Derek's voice. Maybe it was the third time being somehow qualitatively different than the second. Maybe it was 5 years of grinding work being dismissed as something I could just start over on a whim. I'd said no. I'd actually said the word no to my mother, and meant it. She'd cried, called me selfish, said I'd regret this when Derek turned up dead, said she didn't raise me to abandon family. I'd held firm, told her I loved Derek, but I wasn't selling my business. Told her Derek needed to face consequences for once in his life. Told her that enabling him had made things worse, not better. She'd hung up on me. Derek had called me every day for a week. Texts, voicemails, increasingly desperate. Then he'd shown up at my office with a new angle. What if you just made me a partner? Give me equity. I could use that as collateral, get a loan, pay off the debt. We'd be in this together. Family business. I'd actually considered it for half a second before reality reasserted itself. Derek had no skills relevant to digital marketing. He knew nothing about the business. He'd contribute nothing except his name and his debt. And once he was a partner, he'd have access to everything. The accounts, the clients, the intellectual property. He'd have control. I'd said no again. Derek's face had changed then. The desperation had dropped away, replaced by something cold. "You're making a mistake, Theo. You don't understand what you're doing. I understand perfectly. I'm protecting what I built. We'd see about that." He'd left, and I'd thought that was the end of it. I'd been wrong. Derek had been planning. While I thought he was desperately scrambling to save himself from imaginary criminals, he'd been researching how to rob me. My business ran on several platforms: accounting software, payment processors, client management systems, email, banking, everything digital, everything connected, everything protected by passwords. Passwords that I'd never thought to hide from Derek, because he was my brother, because family, because I'd trusted him. 3 years ago, I'd been updating passwords on my laptop while Derek was visiting. He'd been sitting across from me, eating pizza, talking about some job interview. I'd been half listening while cycling through my accounts, typing in variations of the same base password with different numbers and special characters. I'd even joked about it. Password 123 doesn't work anymore. Now it has to be password 123, $sign with a capital P and exactly 5 exclamation points. Derek had laughed, said security was getting ridiculous. Said he just used the same password for everything and hoped for the best. I hadn't thought about that moment again until now, staring at my empty bank account, realizing Derek had been taking notes. He'd watched me type, memorized the patterns, and for 3 years, he'd kept that information filed away, waiting for the moment when it would be useful. The wire transfer had been executed with perfect knowledge of my systems. He'd logged into the business banking portal using credentials I'd updated 3 months ago, but that followed the same pattern he'd observed. He'd verified his identity using my phone number, which he had access to because I'd added him as an authorized contact for emergencies. He'd bypassed two-factor authentication by having the codes sent to an email address he'd somehow gained access to. Every security measure I'd implemented had assumed the threat came from outside, from hackers in other countries, from scammers, from criminals, not from my brother sitting in my apartment memorizing my password patterns while eating my pizza. The forensic analysis would later reveal that Derek had been preparing for months. He'd created shell companies with names similar to my legitimate vendors. He'd set up bank accounts in other states. He'd built an entire infrastructure for embezzlement while I'd been refusing to sell my business to bail him out. When I'd said no, I'd triggered the execution of a plan that had been in place long before he'd ever asked. The debt, I'd realized later, might not have even been real. Or it had been real but not urgent. Or it had been real and urgent, but Derek had decided that stealing from me was easier than actually dealing with his problems. The truth was buried somewhere in layers of lies, and I'd never fully untangle it. What I knew was this: my brother had stolen everything, and I had less than $400 to my name. I'd picked up my phone from where I'd dropped it and called the police. The officer who'd answered had been professional, but not hopeful. "This is a civil matter," he'd said. "You'll need to contact a lawyer. It's not a civil matter. It's theft. It's embezzlement. It's fraud." The officer had sighed. "Was your brother an authorized user on the account?" "Well, no, but he—" "Then how did he access it?" I'd explained about the passwords, about the observation, about the social engineering. The officer had made sympathetic noises. "This is still civil, sir. You'll need to pursue this through the courts. File a police report, yes, but the recovery process will be legal rather than criminal. Unless you can prove intent to defraud, which is difficult with family members who have had legitimate access to systems." I'd filed the report anyway. Answered questions, provided documentation, gave them Derek's information. They'd taken it all down and told me someone would be in touch. I'd known they wouldn't. This wasn't a priority. This was a family dispute dressed up as a crime. The police had better things to do than chase down my brother over money I'd essentially given him access to by being careless with my passwords. My lawyer had been slightly more encouraging. His name was David Reeves, and he'd handled some contract work for my business. He'd listened to my story in his downtown office, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I'd finished, he'd leaned back in his chair. "This is bad, Theo. I'm not going to lie to you, but it's not hopeless. We can file a civil suit. Sue Derek for the full amount plus damages. Get a judgment against him." "Then what?" I'd asked. "He doesn't have any money. That's the whole point. That's why he stole mine. Judgments can follow people for decades," David had said. "We can garnish wages, seize assets, put liens on property. If he ever comes into money again, we'll get it. If he ever comes into money." The words had hung there. Derek had just stolen nearly $1 million. If he was smart, and apparently he was smarter than I'd given him credit for, he'd hidden it somewhere I'd never find it. Offshore accounts, cryptocurrency, cash buried in his backyard. Judgments were useless against money that didn't officially exist. What are my other options? David had considered. Criminal charges if we can prove intent. But as you said, the police aren't interested. We could try to get the FBI involved if he crossed state lines, make it wire fraud. But that's a long shot. Your best bet is probably the civil suit combined with forensic accounting. We track the money, find where it went, freeze those accounts before he can move it again. How long will that take? Months, maybe years, and it's expensive. I'd laughed. It was either laugh or cry. How expensive? $50,000 minimum, maybe $100,000 if this drags on. He'd seen my face. I know you don't have that kind of money right now. We could work on contingency, take a percentage of whatever we recover. But Theo, you need to understand something. Most of these cases don't recover anything. The money gets moved too fast, hidden too well. Your brother had a head start. By the time we freeze accounts, he'll have emptied them. I'd left David's office with a contract to pursue civil litigation on contingency and a timeline that extended into years. My business would be dead long before then. Payroll was due in 3 days. I had 12 employees now, people who depended on me, people who'd taken a chance on a small company because I'd promised them stability and growth. I'd called an all-hands meeting for Monday morning, stood in front of my team in the conference room and told them the truth. Someone gained unauthorized access to our business accounts and stole everything. I'm working with lawyers and police to recover the funds, but right now, the company is bankrupt. I can't make payroll on Friday. I'm sorry. The room had been silent. Then my operations manager, a woman named Priya, who'd been with me from the beginning, had spoken up. What about our clients? Do they know? Not yet. But they will as soon as we fail to deliver on contracted work, which will be this week, because I can't pay for the software subscriptions or the server hosting. Everything's about to shut down. How much do you need to make payroll? 140,000? Priya had nodded, pulled out her phone, started typing. The other employees had followed suit. I'd watched, confused, as they'd huddled together, whispering, showing each other their screens. Finally, Priya had looked up. We're going to cover it. What? Between all of us, we can loan you enough to make payroll and keep the essentials running for a month. That gives you time to figure out the next steps. I can't ask you to do that. You didn't ask. We're offering. Theo, you took a chance on all of us. Some of us had no experience when you hired us. You trained us, trusted us, built something we're proud to be part of. We're not letting one thief destroy that. I'd actually cried then, standing in front of my employees, overwhelmed by the loyalty I apparently didn't deserve. They'd pooled their savings, took out personal loans, maxed out credit cards. Within 3 hours, they'd raised $160,000 to keep Castellano Digital Marketing alive for one more month. It was the most humbling moment of my life. That night, I'd gone to my mother's house. I'd needed her to know what Derek had done, needed her to understand that her golden child, the son she'd always defended, had committed a crime. She'd answered the door in her bathrobe, looking older than I remembered. Theo. I didn't expect to see you. Can I come in? She'd stepped aside. The house looked the same as always, photos of Derek and me on the walls, though Derek's photos outnumbered mine 3-1. The good china in the cabinet that was never used. The worn couch where I'd spent countless hours as a kid. Everything familiar and yet alien now that I knew what my family was capable of. Derek stole from me, I'd said. No preamble, no softening. He hacked my business accounts and took everything. Nearly $1 million. Gone. My mother's face had done something complicated. Shock, then denial, then resignation. I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, Mom. I talked to him. He called me laughing about it. He said I should have helped him when I had the chance. This was revenge for saying no. My mother had sat down heavily. He wouldn't do that. He's desperate. But he wouldn't. He did. I have bank records. I have transaction logs. I have his phone call admitting it. And now my business is bankrupt. My employees are using their own money to keep us afloat. And Derek is gone. My mother had been quiet for a long time. Then, what do you want me to do about it? I'd stared at her. What do I want you to do? Tell me where he is. Mom, he committed a felony. He needs to face consequences. I don't know where he is. That might have even been true. But then she'd said, and if I did know, I wouldn't tell you. He's my son. Both of you are my sons. I'm not going to help one destroy the other. I'm not trying to destroy him. He destroyed me. He made his choices. Now, you have to make yours. Walk away, rebuild, or chase after him, and make this uglier than it already is. Family doesn't do this to family, Theo. You're supposed to forgive. Forgive? Mom, he stole $1 million from me, from the business I spent 5 years building, from the employees who trusted me. And you're telling me to forgive him? I'm telling you that hatred will eat you alive. Derek made a mistake, a huge mistake. But he's still your brother. This isn't a mistake. Mistakes are accidents. This was premeditated theft. This was planned. And you're protecting him. My mother's face had hardened. I'm protecting my family, both of you. If you pursue this, it'll tear us apart forever. Derek will go to prison. You'll be the brother who sent him there. Family gatherings will never be the same. You'll lose me too, because I can't watch you destroy your brother. So, what? The cost of keeping you is letting Derek get away with this? My mother hadn't answered. She'd just looked at me with those same eyes that had convinced me to bail Derek out twice before. But this time, they didn't work. I'd left my mother's house understanding that I was on my own. She'd chosen Derek, same as she'd always chosen Derek. The golden child who could do no wrong versus the responsible child who was expected to fix everything. I'd driven home through streets that looked unfamiliar, even though I'd lived in this city my entire life. Everything felt wrong, contaminated by betrayal. I'd gotten to my apartment and found the landlord's notice taped to my door, eviction warning. I was 2 months behind on rent, something I'd been juggling while focusing on business growth. In my old budget, I'd been planning to catch up next month with the Q3 profits. Those profits were gone now. I'd sat on the floor in my apartment and done the math. Even with my employee's loan, I had maybe 6 weeks before everything collapsed completely. The business would default on contracts, clients would sue, employees would abandon ship. The whole careful structure I'd built would come apart, and I'd be left with nothing but debt and a legal judgment against a brother who'd probably left the country. My phone had buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I'd opened it, expecting spam. Instead, you're probably wondering how I did it. Want to know the funny part? You gave me everything I needed. Remember when you made me your emergency contact? When you added me to your insurance forms? When you let me use your computer that one weekend? You trusted me, little brother. That was your mistake. Trust is weakness. I'm not even sorry. You had your chance to help me the easy way. You chose this. Enjoy bankruptcy. Derek. I'd read the message 3 times. Then I'd done something that surprised me. I'd started laughing. Not because anything was funny, but because the absurdity had broken something in my brain. My brother had stolen my life's work and was now texting me to gloat about it. This was real. This was actually happening. I'd stopped laughing and started thinking. Derek was smart. Smarter than I'd given him credit for. He'd planned this meticulously, exploited my trust, executed perfectly. But smart people make mistakes. They get overconfident. And overconfidence creates vulnerabilities. The text message had come from an unknown number, but it had come, which meant Derek still had his phone, or at least a phone capable of texting my number, which meant he was still reachable, still in the network, still leaving traces. I'd called David Reeves at 11 p.m. He'd answered, groggy. This better be important. Derek just texted me, bragging about the theft. I need you to subpoena his phone records. Tonight. There was rustling on the other end. Send me the message. I'm going to contact the DA. This might be enough for criminal charges. Bragging about a crime is close to confession. I'd sent the screenshot. Then I'd opened my laptop and started digging. Derek was smart, but he was also arrogant. Arrogant people documented their wins. They couldn't help themselves. They needed validation, needed to show off, needed the world to know how clever they were. I'd started with social media. Derek's accounts were all set to private, but I still had access from when he'd added me as a connection years ago. I'd scrolled through his posts from the last month. Nothing obvious, just normal Derek updates, vague posts about new opportunities, about fresh starts, about leaving toxic people behind. But the metadata told a different story. His posts had location tags, even though Derek had thought he'd turned those off. The privacy settings were complex, and Derek had only disabled tags visible to the public. Family members could still see them. I'd mapped the locations. 3 weeks ago, posts from Denver. 2 weeks ago, posts from Seattle. 1 week ago, posts from Vancouver. Derek was moving north, up the coast, probably heading for Canada. The most recent post had been 5 days ago, location tagged in a small town called Bellingham, Washington, 20 miles from the Canadian border. He was going to cross, was maybe already across. I'd pulled up his financial records, the ones I still had access to from when I'd loaned him money. Bank accounts, credit cards, PayPal. Everything was frozen or empty. But Derek had an old Venmo account he'd probably forgotten about. I'd logged into Venmo's website and searched for his username. His recent transactions were public. Most people didn't realize that. Venmo defaulted to making payments visible to friends, and Derek had never changed the setting. The transactions told a story. 5 days ago, he'd paid someone named Melissa K. $200 for deposit. 3 days ago, he'd paid quote 4 for a quote, frame 5. 2 days ago, he'd paid Tim's car rental for week rental. Derek was in Vancouver. He'd rented a car. He was mobile, probably planning to move farther into Canada, somewhere remote where extradition would be complicated. I'd screenshotted everything and sent it to David. Then I'd done something crazy. I'd booked a flight to Vancouver, leaving in 6 hours. I'd packed a bag, called Priya to tell her I'd be gone for a few days, and drove to the airport. I'd spent the entire flight planning. Derek had the money somewhere. He'd stolen it digitally, which meant it existed in digital form somewhere. Bank accounts, cryptocurrency wallets, prepaid cards. He'd have to access it eventually, and when he did, he'd leave traces. I just needed to find him before he moved it somewhere completely untraceable. Vancouver was cold and gray when I landed. I'd rented a car and driven to the hostel Derek had paid for on Venmo. The place was exactly what you'd expect. Cheap, transient, the kind of place where no one asked questions. The front desk clerk had been a young woman with purple hair and a nose ring. She'd looked at the photo I'd shown her of Derek. Yeah, I've seen him. Came in 3 days ago. Paid cash for a week. Is he in trouble? I'm his brother. Family emergency. I need to find him. She'd hesitated. Then, he checked out yesterday, said he was heading east, didn't say where. East was away from the border, which meant either Derek had abandoned his plan to cross into remote Canada, or he'd been paranoid enough to lie to the hostel clerk about his direction. I'd thanked her and left. Sat in my rental car in the hostel parking lot, trying to think. Derek was here, in this city, with my money, the money my employees had sacrificed their savings to replace temporarily, the money that represented 5 years of my life. He was close. I'd opened my laptop and checked Derek's Venmo again. A new transaction had posted an hour ago. Payment to Jay Krakowski for documents. $500. Documents. Fake IDs, probably. Or passport forgery. Derek was buying his way into a new identity. Jay Krakowski was a user with a public profile. I'd clicked through. The profile showed a location. Vancouver, BC. Recent transactions included dozens of payments with descriptions like, quote, 10, quote, 11, quote, 12. This was a forger, and sloppy enough to have a public Venmo. I'd called David again. I found him. Vancouver. He's buying fake documents. David's voice had been sharp. Don't do anything stupid, Theo. Don't approach him. Call the police. Let them handle this. The police don't care. This is a civil matter, remember? Only if you let it be civil. He texted you. He's taunting you. That's harassment. That's a crime. We can get him arrested. I'll call Vancouver PD, I'd said, but I'm not leaving until I see him in custody. I'd hung up and immediately broken my promise. I'd messaged Jay Krakowski on Venmo. Hey, my friend Derek said you did great work for him. I need similar services. Can we meet? The response had come within 5 minutes. $500 for consultation. Cash. Meet at Stanley Park, Prospect Point, 4 p.m. I'd looked at my watch. That gave me 3 hours. I'd driven to Stanley Park and found Prospect Point, a scenic overlook with tourists and joggers. I'd waited on a bench, trying to look casual. At 4:05, a man had approached, thin, nervous, constantly scanning the area. Krakowski. You're the guy who messaged? Yeah. Where's the cash? I'd pulled out $500. Real cash I'd withdrawn on my way here, money I couldn't really afford to spend. Listen, I just need information. My brother Derek came to you. I need to know where he is. Krakowski's face had changed. Cops? No. Family issue. He stole from me. I just want to talk to him. Krakowski had relaxed slightly. I don't give out client information. But for $1,000, maybe I remember something. I didn't have $1,000. I'd shown him my phone. This is my brother. He embezzled nearly $1 million from my business. He's here, right now, probably getting documents from you or someone you know. I'm not asking you to betray him. I'm asking you to tell me where I can find him so I can try to get my money back. Krakowski had studied my face. Then, there's a bar on Granville Street. The Narwhal. Your brother mentioned he was staying nearby. That's all I know. I'd handed him the $500 and left. The Narwhal was a dive bar in a sketchy part of town. I'd parked down the street and watched the entrance. It was nearly 7 p.m. now. If Derek was staying nearby, he might come here for dinner or drinks. I'd waited 2 hours. Nothing. I'd been about to give up when I'd seen him. Derek, walking down the sidewalk like he had every right to exist, wearing new clothes, looking healthier than he had in years, walking with the confidence of someone who'd gotten away with it. I'd gotten out of my car and followed him. He'd walked into the Narwhal. I'd waited 5 minutes, then gone in after him. The bar was dark, smelled like beer and old wood. Derek had been sitting at the far end, ordering whiskey. I'd walked up and sat next to him. He'd looked over, and his face had gone through an amazing series of expressions: surprise, fear, anger, then forced casualness. "Theo, didn't expect to see you here. Derek, how's my money?" He'd laughed, humorlessly. "Your money? That's rich. You mean the money you refused to use to save my life?" "That money?" "The money you stole after I said no to being extorted for the third time," I'd corrected. "You committed a felony, Derek. You destroyed my business, embezzled from my employees. And now you're buying fake documents and planning to disappear. Your business is fine. You're dramatic. My business is bankrupt. My employees loaned me their own money to keep it alive for 1 month. You didn't just steal from me. You stole from 12 other people who never did anything to you." Derek had taken a sip of his whiskey. "Sounds like you have loyal employees. Maybe you can rebuild." The words had been so dismissive, so casually cruel, that I'd felt something snap inside me. "You're not sorry at all, are you?" "Sorry?" Derek had leaned closer. "Let me tell you what I'm sorry about. I'm sorry I wasted years trying to be the son Mom wanted. I'm sorry I watched you succeed while I failed at everything. I'm sorry I asked you for help 3 times like a beggar, when you should have offered because you're my brother. And I'm sorry that you're too stupid to understand that you owed me that money. I built my business from nothing. I don't owe you anything. You owe me everything." Derek's voice had risen. "Who do you think took the blame when you broke Mom's lamp? Who covered for you when you snuck out in high school? Who taught you to drive? Who introduced you to your first client?" I'd stared at him. "What are you talking about? The restaurant, your first job, the website you built. That was my friend Ricardo's place. I told him to hire you. You were broke and desperate, and I helped you. I'd never known that, never even suspected. And now you're using it to justify stealing from me?" Derek had finished his whiskey, signaled for another. "I'm not justifying anything. I'm explaining. You think you're self-made. You think you did this all alone, but you had help, my help. Mom's help. The help of everyone who believed in you while I was failing. And when I finally needed help back, you said no. So yeah, I took what was mine. What was yours? Derek, that money represented 5 years of my life. You can rebuild," Derek had said. "You're talented. Everyone says so. You'll start another business, make another million. But me? I'm done. This is my last chance to start over. With stolen money. Money I earned. We both know that's bullshit." I'd pulled out my phone. "I've been tracking you, Derek. I know about Krakowski. I know about the fake documents. I know about the Venmo transactions. And I've sent everything to my lawyer and the Vancouver police. They're probably on their way here right now." Derek's face had gone pale. "You're bluffing. Am I? Check outside. Want to bet your freedom on it?" He'd looked toward the door. I'd been bluffing. The police weren't coming. I hadn't called them, but Derek didn't know that. "Listen," Derek had said. His voice had changed. Quieter now, scared. "We can work this out. I'll give you back half, 100,000. That's enough to keep your business alive until you recover, right? I want all of it. I can't give you all of it. I've already spent some. On what? Rent, documents, travel, paying off debts. How much is left?" Derek had hesitated. 600,000, give or take. Give or take what? Fine, 580,000. The rest is gone. I'd felt rage building. "You stole my business, my employees' security, my future, and you've already blown $300,000 in 3 weeks?" Derek had shrugged. "Some of the debt was real, Theo. I wasn't completely lying, just mostly lying." I'd stood up. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to transfer every cent back to my business account. Right now. Tonight. And then you're going to turn yourself in to the police. Or what? You'll call them? Go ahead. By the time they get here, I'll be gone. You think you're the only one who can track someone? I know about your car rental. I know about your documents. I know about Krakowski. But most importantly, I'd pulled out my laptop, opened it on the bar. I've been tracking your transactions in real time. Every Venmo payment. Every credit card charge. And I've been documenting everything you've said tonight. This entire conversation has been recorded." I'd turned the laptop around, showed him the recording software running, audio waveforms moving with our voices. Derek's face had crumbled. "That's illegal. You can't record someone without their consent. In Washington State, It's a one-party consent state. I'm one party. This is completely legal and admissible in court. Derek had reached for my laptop. I'd pulled it away. Don't. You're already facing embezzlement charges. Don't add assault to the list. The bartender had been watching us now, sensing conflict. I'd kept my voice level. Transfer the money, Derek. All of it. Right now. Or this recording goes to the police, the FBI, and every journalist I can find. Your face will be everywhere. You'll be the brother who destroyed his own family business. You'll never be able to hide. Derek had been breathing hard, his hands shaking. You're serious? Dead serious. He'd pulled out his phone, started typing. I'd watched over his shoulder as he logged into his banking app. The account showed $530,000, less than he'd claimed. You said you had $580. I lied. Obviously, transfer it, all of it. What about the $50,000 I already spent? That's your problem. Figure it out. Sell something. Beg your friends. I don't care. But if you don't transfer $580,000 by tomorrow morning, this recording goes public. Derek had stared at his phone for a long moment. Then he'd started making transfers. $530,000 from his account to mine. I'd watch the confirmation emails arrive on my phone, each one a small piece of my life being returned. But we're still $50,000 short. I'll get it. How? I'll borrow it. From who? You've burned every bridge. Derek's face had been desperate. From Mom. I'll call Mom. She'll give me $50,000 to make this right. Your mother has $50,000? I'd been skeptical. Derek had looked away. She's been saving. For retirement, for emergencies. This is an emergency. You're going to steal from our mother now? I'm borrowing. I'll pay her back. You won't. You never pay anyone back. But fine. Call her, get the money, transfer it to me by tomorrow at noon. And Derek, if you run, if you disappear, if you try anything, the recording still goes public. Consider yourself on parole. I'd left the bar with $530,000 returned and a promise of 50 more. It wasn't everything. The $300,000 Derek had already spent was gone, probably forever, but it was enough to save the business, enough to pay back my employees, enough to breathe again. I'd gone back to my hotel and called Priya. We got most of it back. $580 by tomorrow. The business is saved. There had been silence on the other end. Then, you found him. How? I'd explained about the Venmo tracking, the fake document dealer, the recording. Priya had laughed. That's insane. You flew to Vancouver and basically did a citizen's arrest on your brother. Are you insane? Probably. But it worked. What happens now? Now I go home, make sure the transfer's clear, pay you all back, and then I figure out if I press charges. You should, Priya had said. He needs to face consequences. I know, but he's still my brother. He's a thief who destroyed you. Family or not, he should pay. I'd promised to think about it, but I'd already known the answer. Derek needed to face justice. Not just for me, but for the principle of the thing. You don't get to rob people and walk away because you share DNA. The next morning, I'd checked my account. $530,000 had cleared. At 11:45 a.m., another $50,000 had arrived with the memo. Quote 13. I'd sat on the hotel bed, looking at that memo, feeling something complicated. Relief that the money was back. Anger that it had been taken in the first place. Sadness that my family had disintegrated. My mother had given up her retirement savings to fix Derek's mess. Again, she'd enabled him one last time. And Derek's message made it clear he blamed me for everything. I'd called David Reeves. The money's back. All of it. That's great news, Theo. So we're dropping the suit? No, we're pressing charges. I want him prosecuted, even though you got the money back. Especially because I got the money back. This proves he had it. Proves he could have returned it voluntarily. He only gave it back when I forced him to. That's not restitution. That's coercion. And besides, this isn't just about money anymore. He committed crimes. He should face the consequences. David had filed the criminal complaint with all the evidence. The recording, the transaction records, the text messages. The FBI had gotten involved because the wire fraud crossed state lines. Derek had been arrested in Vancouver 2 days later, trying to cross the border with his fake documents. They'd extradited him back to the U.S. within a week. The trial had been 6 months later. I'd testified. explained the years of enabling, the 3 bailouts, the final theft, played the recording of Derek confessing, shown the transaction records. The jury had deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all counts: wire fraud, computer fraud, embezzlement. The judge had sentenced Derek to 8 years in federal prison. My mother hadn't attended the trial. She'd sent me a letter the week after Derek's sentencing. Short, to the point. You destroyed your brother's life. You got your money back, but you still pressed charges. You still sent him to prison. I hope you're happy. I hope it was worth it. Because you've lost your family. I will never forgive you for this. Don't contact me again. I'd read the letter once and put it in a drawer. Didn't respond. What was there to say? She'd chosen Derek over me for the last time. She'd rather lose one son completely than hold the other accountable for his crimes. The business had recovered. It had taken a year to rebuild the trust of clients who'd fled during the bankruptcy scare. I'd paid back every employee, with interest. Several of them had refused the interest, said they'd done it because they believed in the company. We'd grown, hired more people, moved to a bigger office. 5 years after Derek's arrest, Castellano Digital Marketing was worth $3 million. I'd gotten offers to sell. Had turned them all down. This business wasn't for sale, not to bail out family, not for anything. Derek would be eligible for parole in 3 more years. I'd gotten a letter from him last month, the first communication since his arrest. He'd written that he'd had a lot of time to think, that he understood now what he'd done wrong, that prison had taught him about consequences, that he hoped, when he got out, we could rebuild our relationship. I'd read the letter twice. Then I'd put it in the same drawer as Mom's letter. Maybe someday I'd respond. Maybe Derek really had learned something. Maybe 8 years in prison had changed him into someone capable of taking responsibility. But I doubted it. People like Derek didn't change. They just got better at hiding who they really were. Or maybe I was wrong. Maybe people could change. Maybe forgiveness was possible. But I wasn't ready to find out. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The business I'd built, the one Derek had tried to destroy, was thriving. My employees were loyal. My clients were happy. I was successful by any measure. And every day, I was grateful that I'd said no. That I'd finally drawn a boundary. That I'd refused to be the solution to someone else's problems. Derek had taught me something valuable, even if he hadn't meant to. He'd taught me that family doesn't excuse cruelty. That love doesn't mean enabling destruction. That sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is let them face the consequences of their own choices. I'd built a good life from the ashes of betrayal. That was enough. 10 years after the theft, I stood in my new office building, the one Castellano Digital Marketing owned outright, watching the sun set over the city. My company employed 90 people now. We'd expanded into 3 cities. The business Derek had tried to destroy had become something bigger than I'd ever imagined. Priya was my co-owner now. She'd earned it through loyalty and brilliance. We'd built something together that no one could take from us. My phone buzzed. A notification from the prison system. Derek had been released on parole that morning. I'd looked at the notification for a long moment, feeling nothing. No fear, no anger, just acknowledgement that somewhere out there my brother was free again. I'd deleted the notification and turned back to the sunset. Derek had made his choices. I'd made mine. And I'd chosen to build something that mattered, something that lasted, something that no amount of betrayal could destroy. That was the only revenge worth having. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.